Welcome in to the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast. My name is Joel Silverberg. I really appreciate you taking the time to check out the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast, whether you're watching on our new YouTube platform or you're listening on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Thank you so much for checking out the KIB Podcast. We've seen our subscriber numbers go up in the last couple of weeks, so really appreciate everybody who's following, subscribing, listening. If you're sharing the podcast, we really appreciate it. So thank you again so much for checking out the KIB Podcast. We've got a loaded show because Knoxville has a loaded weekend coming up. Knoxville will head to Pensacola on Friday and Saturday for 2 games against the Ice Flyers, and then wrap up the weekend by making a stop in Huntsville on Sunday on their way back to Knoxville. So 3 games in 3 days, the first 3 and 3 for Knoxville this season, as the Ice Bears have games 6, 7, and 8 coming up this weekend. For Knoxville this past weekend, the loss to Fayetteville 2-0. We'll break that down as we get you set for what is to come for this weekend. We will talk to Erik Bremer of the Pensacola Ice Flyers, the broadcaster for the Ice Flyers, so he'll help us preview the start for Pensacola. They got their first win of the season Friday against Roanoke and then picked up an overtime loss against Fayetteville on Sunday after losing in regulation to Roanoke on Saturday. And then we'll be joined by Steve Moulton, who is the broadcaster for the Huntsville Havoc. He'll help preview what's been a pretty solid start for Huntsville so far, 4-1-1 through 6 games so far this season, coming off that loss to Evansville, but a game where Huntsville vastly outshot Evansville. Thunderbolts needed a lot from Cole Cece and net and ended up being a defensive struggle. Huntsville had the looks. I think Evansville got really hot in net and did a great job defensively at trying to limit as many grade A chances as they could, but a low-scoring loss for Huntsville, but still a very good start for Stuart Steffen's team in his second year as the Havoc's head coach. So for Knoxville, a couple of tough breaks that go against the Ice Bears. Defensively, you have a shot from the left point that kind of pinballs its way to the far side of the trapezoid, right into the wheelhouse for Tyler Barrow. He's able to skate around the net for Steven Mundinger, who's trying to get back from left to right in his own crease, and Barrow's able to beat Mundinger to that short side post that gives Fayetteville an early 1-0 lead. And then in the second period, you have a shot that misses wide, rattles around the boards. Nick Parity throws the puck on net from the left point, and John Monkovich gets his stick on it to redirect past Mundinger. So another tough bounce. That's the only scoring detail of the game. But I will say a little bit different than what we saw this time a year ago. Knoxville started 0-6, and 5 of those losses were by multiple goals. They had the 2-1 loss to Macon in the second game of the season, but then you look at some of those other results. 7-2 loss to Macon, 5-0 loss to Birmingham, 6-0 loss to Birmingham, 4-1 loss to Fayetteville. It was a really tough start for Knoxville last season, and they were getting vastly outshot. They were getting outcompeted. That hasn't been the case this year. Knoxville outshot Fayetteville 31-22 on Saturday, outshot the Marksmen 13-3. The grade A chances, I think, were kept at a minimum, and the case could be made for both teams. Fayetteville didn't have a ton of high-quality looks throughout the course of the game, and so Steven Mundinger, I thought, did a really good job in net. Obviously got a little bit unlucky on a couple of those bad bounces, but Knoxville also did a really good job collectively at not forcing Mundinger to stand on his head. I thought he was solid in net. He put Knoxville in position to win. Knoxville defensively put itself in a position to win. It just didn't score on the other end. You had the great move made by Erik Olson to off the keep-in to traps it with the glove and then skates in with the power move. Ryan Kenny poke checks the puck free. Braden Stannard comes in, tees off on the loose puck. Kenny makes a good stave. Then Olson again in the first period makes a move to get free in the left circle, has Egan coming down the slot, makes the pass. Egan has a good shot. Kenny does a good job at making a good pad save. And then you have the backdoor pass to Jimmy Soper that just misses that short side post. So opportunities were there. They kind of came at a premium. I thought that was the case for both teams. Both teams did a really good job at blocking shots. The first period, I can't imagine how frustrating it was for both coaches offensively. A lot of perimeter shots that were getting knocked down in the slot. Goalies not having to see a ton of pucks throughout the course of the first 25, 30 minutes of the game. And Knoxville is carrying games for stretches at a time. The goals just need to start coming. Knoxville just with 9 goals in 5 games so far this season, and the coaching staff is not sitting back and thinking, okay, well, it's just going to develop. We just have to execute better. There is a, I don't want to say a full sense of urgency. There's always a sense of urgency to improve your team, but John Gurskus and Jason Price understand that what's happening right now offensively needs to get better. They want it to get better sooner rather than later, and so they are working on doing things that is going to change that for Knoxville offensively, especially with 3 games in 3 days coming up starting on Friday. So we'll talk to Erik Bremer, the broadcaster for the Pensacola Ice Flyers, on the other side to preview the first 2 games of Knoxville's 3-game weekend. So Erik Bremer from Pensacola coming up as you check out the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple.
And a backhand try followed by a forehand try as Hayes sends in a shot. And on the second try, an Ice Flyers goal. It's Cook. It's 1-0 Pensacola.
And we continue to move on with the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast. Knoxville opens a 3-game road weekend on the road in Pensacola for games on Friday and Saturday down at the hangar. And here to help us preview the Ice Flyers is Erik Bremer, the Ice Flyers broadcaster. So, Erik, appreciate the time. Kind of an action-packed weekend for Pensacola. Go on the road to Roanoke, tough place to play, pick up the first win of the year on Friday, kind of have, a tough struggle on Saturday, and then manage to rebound, go on the road against a really good Fayetteville team, which is top in the SPHL standings right now, and pick up a point with an overtime loss. What have you kind of made out of Pensacola so far this season?
I think at this point in the season, you're looking for growth, because I think we knew going into the season it was going to be a transition year. Head coach Gary Graham brought in a bunch of his own players who had never played before and in many cases hadn't even practiced before the first game started. So while it wasn't a great start to the year in that opening weekend, to get 3 out of a possible 6 points in that 3-game road swing shows a step forward, and there's obviously plenty of season left to be played. If this team can gel and get familiar with each other and play like they did for the most part over the course of the last weekend, I think that this will be a competitive Pensacola team moving forward.
This team made some moves over the offseason. Obviously, Dallas Como staying up in the ECHL, not getting Garrett Milan back in Pensacola, but still made some moves, trading for Caden Cahill after the season got started. Cam Cook, maybe one of the biggest offseason moves of the entire summer. The offense kind of got off to a slow start. What has been the issue? Why has it kind of gone sideways from an offensive standpoint, despite some of the talent that is in this lineup?
If the Ice Flyers knew, it wouldn't still be happening. But I think from a broad sense, it's just trying to figure out who you can go to get those goals. Many of the names that you just mentioned, these are the veteran leaders. And while it wasn't necessarily a championship caliber team the last couple of years, it was a playoff caliber team. And you had a hierarchy of players that you knew you could go to. So I think we just need to figure out, the Ice Flyers need to figure out who we can go to in situations like that. And a couple names are kind of cropping up in terms of getting the back of the net, but it's only 6 games in. So I think we've still got to figure out who that is. And some of the veterans who are still on this team from past seasons, like Ivan Bondarenko, they need to adjust to their new teammates and produce the way we know they can.
What do you think was maybe the biggest difference for this past weekend from the first 2 weeks of the season? Why was Pensacola able to have more success? Obviously, what happened on Saturday in Roanoke, not ideal with the 7-2 loss, but getting 3 out of 6 points. What changed, do you think, from weeks 1 and 2 to week 3?
I think just having seen it from the broadcast and not being there in person, there's a bit more cohesion with the different lines having played with each other. That's one of the challenges of being in Pensacola. You don't get a ton of extra ice time. So any time that these specific lines can spend with each other and get that sixth sense in terms of anticipating that next move from your teammates, I think that helps. Obviously it helps, but I think Pensacola more than many other teams in this league, just because of the restrictions that they have in terms of practice time, that might be more of an uphill battle, and tightening those things up and just finding the rhythm that a good hockey team is able to find over the course of the season. That's something that was certainly better this past weekend than it was the first couple home games.
Now, the atmosphere in Pensacola still it still sees one of the best in the SPHL. Attendance grew last season, so obviously team staff doing everything they can to get people in the building. You've got another Blue Angels night coming up this weekend. That was such a hit last year, and I'm sure everybody's so fired up about that. So having the 2 home games coming up, because this team has been on the road more times than it's been at home. So having the 2 home games this weekend against Knoxville should be a fun atmosphere, regardless of the initial results for this team.
Yeah, and while it's always fun to play in front of a packed house, it's even more fun to play in front of a packed house when you've got a lead and when you give the fans a reason to cheer. The Ice Flyers did not give their fans too many reasons to get excited those first couple home games. But as we look back towards last year's Blue Angels weekend in front of a great crowd, just getting those early goals, activating the crowd, and turning it into a party really plays to the home ice advantage. And I think that'll be something that you and I will both be keeping an eye on here this weekend. Can the Ice Flyers make a statement early and get the crowd activated? Because I think that really will help things as Pensacola tries to regain that home ice advantage that they've had in past seasons.
So Knoxville will be down in Pensacola to start the weekend on Friday and Saturday before heading to Huntsville on Sunday. 2 teams that are both trying to get the offense going. And Erik, of course, will have the call on the home side of the broadcast for Flow Hockey. But Ice Bears fans can hear the Ice Bears broadcast at Carolina Ale House on Friday and Saturday. The puck drop is set for 8:05 Eastern time, 7:05 local time if you're planning on making the trip down to the Pensacola Bay Center. And Erik Bremer helps us preview the Pensacola Ice Flyers before the Ice Bears head down to the Sunshine State. Erik, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you this weekend.
Yeah, it'll be good to catch up.
So again, that is Erik Bremer, the voice of the Pensacola Ice Flyers. Knoxville and Pensacola set to duke it out. These are the only 2 matchups between these 2 teams in the regular season. Pensacola does not come to Knoxville this season, so just these 2 matchups this weekend, only 2 times these 2 teams are scheduled to play. We will talk to Steve Moulton of the Huntsville Havoc to preview Knoxville's final game of the weekend, that Sunday night tilt down in North Alabama. So Steve will join us on the other side to preview the Huntsville Havoc, off to a very good start in Stuart Steffen's second year as the Havoc's head coach. I'm Joel Silverberg. You're tuned in to the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast.
Puck off of the skate, sends it out to Palmer. Palmer holds it. Palmer through the near circle, throws it on net, shot to goal! We are tied as that deflected, I believe, off of Mason Palmer's stick. Either way, Tisket to Tasket, it went in the basket. We're tied at 1.
As we move on here on the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast, Knoxville wraps up this 3-game weekend playing at Huntsville on Sunday, kind of in the late afternoon, early evening. It'll be a 6:00 puck drop Eastern time if you're planning on catching the road game watch party at Carolina Ale House, the official host of all Ice Bears road games this season. And to talk about Huntsville to start the season is Steve Moulton, Huntsville's broadcaster. You can hear him on The Drive on 97.7 ESPN The Zone in Tennessee Valley. So, Steve, good to talk to you. And a good start for Huntsville, 4-1-1 to start the year. They've been very good defensively. What's kind of been the big standing out point for this team in Stuart Steffen's second year at the helm?
I appreciate the invite. And just to answer your question, to have 13 players back from last year's team, had a lot of continuity with a team that made it all the way to the President's Cup final before losing to Peoria in that third and final game. But nonetheless, yeah, you get your 2 goaltenders back too. And as good as the defense is, you're only as good as your goaltending. And Mike Robinson and as well as Brian Wilson have both performed really well, although took our first regular season L against Evansville in particular yesterday. So it just it's a little up and down and feeling this team out a little bit. This team feels like they're a tad bit quicker than they were a year ago. But, I mean, the early returns are the fact that this team is at least showing me a lot of skill here early, and it's something positive to grow on.
And even with that regulation loss, you kind of you read between the lines a little bit with Evansville. Huntsville puts up 45 shots on goal. Cole Ceci has a great night in net. So even with some of the losses, it took a standout performance by Cole Ceci and then an overtime effort from Evansville. Both those, the two losses this year so far for Huntsville. So even then, there hasn't really been a game where Huntsville's been vastly outplayed through 6 games so far, has there?
That's a really good point, Joel. But one thing in particular I was looking for was last year our special teams struggled in a big way, be it the penalty kill or the power play. And at least early on, it looks like we're in a little bit better of a sync with the power play and the PK. But those are two areas of concern that I had on this hockey team heading into this year, especially after how much they struggled, especially in January and February, if memory serves, on this hockey squad. But I think there's some decent pieces around here, and there's a couple of brothers squads on this roster as well that make it a very unique and fun to follow in a big way. And I'm just with Dominic Procopio and the injury that he had last year, and to come back, and now he's playing with his brother Gio as well. That's a neat story to follow. But it's this team is you can definitely tell that even though Glenn DiTullio is not the head coach, there is Glenn DiTullio fingerprints all over this organization.
And considering some of the pieces that Huntsville lost from last year's squad, no Dylan Stewart, no David Thompson, no Eric Henderson, no Brett Humberstone, doesn't really seem to be a problem. You highlighted the goaltending a moment ago, and that's been so key for Brian Wilson and Mike Robinson being back. Huntsville right now, the best defensive numbers in the league through 6 games so far. How tough is it just with a hardworking team like that, a good D-core, good goaltending? It seems like goals kind of come at a premium against Huntsville so far.
Well, it's something else that has, at least according to Stuart Steffen, who I just that kick start, that little slow start, really getting the ball rolling, if you will. So that has been a little bit of an issue, at least according to Stu. But you mentioned some guys that we lost, but I'll highlight Jack Yannick in particular. Jack is back, so is Robbie Fisher. Robbie played really well in the postseason for us at the end of last year, and he is steamrolling that into. And there is certain guys that Buster Larson had an amazing playoff run last year for the Havoc as well, and he's one of the cornerstones on that front core as well that the Havoc need to have a big year. And I think Buster is primed to have maybe his best year as a professional hockey player.
And that's saying something, considering off the season he had a year ago, kind of had an awkward start with Fayetteville and Birmingham, and then seemed to really be the driving force behind Huntsville's offense over the second half of the season. He potentially maybe Buster Larson and an early candidate for MVP, just talking long-term, not based off current numbers, but kind of coming into this season, one of the returners that could potentially be in that conversation come April.
At least I have that thought. I know the team is kind of putting a lot on him as being one of those leaders, Joel. So I think everything is prepped for him if he can stay healthy. And the call-ups are always an issue in this league as well. So we want him to play good, but I don't know how good we want him to play. But nonetheless, to answer your question, I think things are set up quite well for Buster to have a breakout year.
Again, talking to Steve Moulton with the Huntsville Havoc, and what can kind of Knoxville fans that are expecting the trip, what can they expect to see Sunday afternoon when these two teams play? Obviously, Huntsville's focused on Macon right now, that game coming up on Friday, but what can Knoxville fans expect to see that maybe they didn't see in that preseason game back on October 11th?
So we started our sellouts in a row, I want to say in early January, and there was one Sunday day game, and this is a 5:00 puck drop, 6:00 your time, but the front office staff was nervous about the sellout streak, which, by the way, this the game yesterday, or excuse me, 2 days ago, was the 20th consecutive sellout for the fans here in Huntsville. So I know there's probably a little trepidation, but it is the day before Veterans Day. And of course, the military is a big part of this community as well here in Huntsville. So I'm expecting another packed out crowd. And it really is amazing, not just here in Huntsville, but I'm seeing you guys in Knoxville packing it out as well. Pensacola's doing really well from attendance standpoint as well. The quality of hockey it's fun to watch. It really is league wide.
And so for Knoxville and Huntsville, we're kind of renewing this rivalry again. It's a new era for Knoxville, obviously. From not sure how much you've been able to kind of see of the Ice Bears so far, or from tracking from the preseason game to the first few games of the season. Kind of what stands out about just from a matchup standpoint on what we could see this Sunday when Knoxville comes down to Huntsville?
Well, I have not seen a whole lot of Knoxville. In fact, I'd love to get your temperature on it, honestly, because at least from my experiences, especially up there in Knoxville with the tighter rink as compared to Huntsville, it just feels like the more physical team usually wins, not necessarily shots on goal or whoever's got the most power plays, but that physicality part of it, the forechecking and just trying to get situated in the right places is always a big deal. And it always makes this matchup a whole lot of fun to follow.
I think what you're potentially going to be able to see, since you asked, looking at Saturday's loss to Fayetteville, I think we saw two really hardworking teams that were blocking a lot of shots, making life miserable for opposing offenses, and kind of an unfortunate bounce for Knoxville behind the net that allows Tyler Barrow to score, and then a redirect that gets by Steve Mundinger. So I thought it was a very defensive struggle. Now, Knoxville's got some offensive things that I know they want to improve upon. Head coach John Gurskus has been wanting to, try to drive the offense, drive the power play more and more and more. But I think you saw two teams exceptionally hardworking. I think you could see something similar on Sunday. So a lot of block shots, a lot of sticks in the shooting lanes, a lot of frustrated shooters potentially. So it could be that sort of a gritty rivalry matchup between these two teams on Sunday. And Steve, last thing that we'll get you out of here. What has it kind of been like watching the progression of Stuart Steffen, just his own era kind of beginning, especially after the playoff run that Huntsville had a season ago? They go in as the 5 seed, maybe not a ton of outside expectations outside of Huntsville. Then you go on this run to the final, huge playoff series win over Roanoke in what was an incredible series, and then end up losing a tight battle to Peoria. So what is kind of, I guess, now the expectation now that Stu has kind of had a season at the helm? What is it like just in Huntsville now that this new era is officially underway in year 2?
Well, at least from my standpoint of seeing Stu go from player to assistant coach to head coach, you see the grays and you see the lack of hair. So yes, I am getting older, but to specifically answer your question, Joel, it really feels like even going into the locker room and sitting down and talk with Stu, that it's his, that this is his team. He feels comfortable. He knows Glenn's there in the front office, but there was, especially late in the season, very little interaction, and the buy-in process was there. But this feels like Stu's team, Stu and Ty as well, two big parts of the organization for a number of years. But there's just that comfortability that I see that Stu has that I did not quite see at this time last year.
And so Knoxville will head down to Huntsville, technically be heading up to Huntsville from Pensacola on Sunday as the Ice Bears wrap up this 3-game trip this upcoming weekend down at Probst Arena on the Roto-Rooter ice, Roto-Rooter Pharmacy ice down in northern Alabama. And you will be able to, before that, hear Steve on the call for Huntsville's upcoming game against Macon in Huntsville this Friday night. He's Steve Moulton with The Drive on 97.7 ESPN, the Tennessee Valley in the zone. And he is the broadcaster for the Huntsville Havoc. Steve, really appreciate the time. Thank you so much. And we will talk to you on Sunday.
Looking forward to seeing some gray hairs in your future as well there, young man.
It's year 11 for me, so it's going to get there at some point. Steve, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate the invite.
Again, Steve Moulton, the voice of the Huntsville Havoc, and we appreciate you taking the time to check out this edition of the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast. Again, we will have the call for all 3 games this weekend on 92.5 WKCE, the flagship station of the Knoxville Ice Bears, and you can check out the road game watch parties at Carolina Ale House Friday and Saturday against Pensacola, and then Sunday in the early evening against Huntsville. I'm Joel Silverberg. Thank you so much for checking out this edition of the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast.